because the only thing that keeps Russia going right now is the sale of oil. If they don't have the sale of oil, they can't afford the war. And if they can't afford the war, then they're forced to come to the negotiating table.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've had Sir Bill Browder on the show. We've responded to the fact that Donald Trump has slashed his 50-day deadline to Vladimir Putin to end this war to 10 to 12 days. That takes us to the 5th or the 7th of August. Now, this came very unexpectedly, so we respond to this press conference where Trump announces this in a very nonchalant way while sitting next to UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. So we speak all about that. We speak about the Kremlin's response, the fact that they've threatened a potential war with the United States, so what that would even mean. We speak about whether these sanctions and these tariffs are enough to completely cripple Russia's economy and in turn end the war. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. So Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Great to be here.
Well, excellent news from last night in an unexpected decision. Donald Trump, while golfing in Scotland and having a press conference with Sir Keir Starmer, announced that he's changing his tune on the 50-day deadline he gave to Vladimir Putin to end the war. He said, yeah, I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 to 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting. I want to be generous, but we also don't see any progress being made. So your reaction to this, Bill, this could see as some progress happening before the 5th or the 7th of August.
Well, I think it's, of course, better the sooner the better for sanctions. It's unexpected. Trump usually disappoints. He doesn't overachieve in the area of supporting Ukraine. However, and this is a big however, let's see what happens in 10 or 12 days. And I've read reports that 10 or 12 days is now 2 weeks. And so, Trump unfortunately doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt, because this was the fifth time that he issued an ultimatum. Now he's sped up this ultimatum, but until we see what actually happens, I think that all judgment should be reserved.
And that's a completely fair point. And of course, we've got this TACO acronym still floating around, Bill, which is, of course, Trump always chickens out. So we do have to wait and see if he does invoke it, these tariffs, these sanctions. But why do you think Donald Trump has changed his mind? And I know that we can't go ahead and exactly say he's completely changed his mind, but what do you think led to this? Because I wonder if the White House has come to the conclusion that these diplomatic conversations, these peace negotiations that Russia and Ukraine have had, they had their third round last week. It ended after 40 minutes. Of course, we saw a prisoner exchange with 1,200 prisoners agreed upon, which was great news, but we saw absolutely no progress in ending the war. So I wonder, has the United States come to this conclusion that these civil conversations, diplomatic route isn't working?
Well, they could have, if that was the reason, they would have come to that conclusion much earlier. I mean, Putin has made it clear from the get-go that he only wants to achieve his most ambitious objectives, and he doesn't mind losing 1,000 or 1,500 soldiers a day. He doesn't mind running down his supply of equipment, so he has to buy stuff from North Koreans and the Iranians, and so that's been clear all along. I think that there's probably a lot of other factors that play into this whole thing. One of them, of course, is that there are a number of very senior Republicans, members of the Senate and the House of Representatives, who are big supporters of Ukraine. And at the moment, he's a bit on thin ice because of this whole Epstein controversy, and he needs all the help and support he can get from his people. And Lindsey Graham has a piece of legislation that's sitting out there with 84 co-sponsors on it, which would impose 500% tariffs on buyers of Russian oil. And he has told Lindsey Graham to put that in abeyance. And so it's impossible to know what drives Donald Trump's decisions. There are so many different cross currents of interest and intrigue that make him do what he's going to do, but I think we should all be hopeful. He's moved it from 50 days to 10 to 12 days or 2 weeks or whatever it is. That will come very quickly, and then we'll have a chance to see Is he going to be tacoing out, or is he going to actually do the right thing and make it really painful for Russia to sell its oil and to get money and to continue to fight this war?
Well, not to be completely pessimistic, Bill, but the distractions that Trump was throwing in front of MAGA, in front of Republicans, in terms of the Epstein drama, they weren't working. Of course, he was blaming Democrats. He was trying to shade Obama. There was many tactics that his old playbook that were not working. Do you think that maybe by him saying and shortening this deadline is another distraction from all the Epstein drama? Because the Epstein drama has been going on for a few weeks now, and it doesn't seem to be dying down anytime soon.
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, it's not as if the whole world is saying, okay, now we're going to forget about the Epstein drama because Trump has shortened his deadline. I don't think that those two things really even overlap. If all of a sudden there was a new and very vocal confrontation with Russia, that might actually distract everybody. But we shall see. I mean, it's not too far into the future, and we can judge what happens when it happens. And it's really important to say that, which is that talk is cheap in this administration. He's just the opposite of Teddy Roosevelt, which is speak softly and carry a big stick. He's speaking loudly and not necessarily carrying much of a stick at all. And so we shall see. And the proof will be in the actions, not in the talk.
President Zelensky, he issued a heartfelt statement of thanking President Trump for stepping in, believing that sanctions are a key element to ending this war. He said that POTUS now has a clear stance. But do you think that Trump pre-warned Zelensky that he was making this announcement, Bill? Because it did really feel off the cuff.
I really don't know. I mean, it's very hard to say. This is the most unconventional presidency in the history of presidencies. Diplomacy is not how it's normally done, and foreign policy is not how it's normally done. This is all, shoot from the hip, let the chips land where they may in tariff policy and foreign policy and military policy. And so I have no idea who did what to whom. It's all just so random. And all we can say is that, there's a terrible war going on that Putin has started, that he continues to execute. And we have a victim, Ukraine, who is, for the most part, has the sympathy of all the civilized world until very recently. And then it became ambiguous whether the United States sympathized with Ukraine. And it would be nice if the United States developed a policy, if Trump developed a policy of continuing to sympathize with Ukraine and support Ukraine to end this war on their terms.
The threats that we're referring to that Donald Trump says he would invoke if Putin doesn't end the war in 10 to 12 days, of course, these 100% tariffs or secondary sanctions targeting Russia and countries purchasing Russian energy and products. But originally, this threat of 50 days, Bill, the Kremlin had responded calling it theatrical ultimatums and said that they weren't worried about them. But should Putin be worried about these tariffs and secondary sanctions if Trump says, no, I'm invoking them?
Well, so tariffs are a non-issue for Russia. Russia barely exports anything to the United States, and so it doesn't really matter. Secondary sanctions could, if designed properly, be devastating. And when I say properly, I look to the Lindsey Graham secondary sanctions bill, which would impose 500% sanctions or tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil. So if you're China or India or Turkey and you're buying Russian oil, and all of a sudden you see the prospect of 500% tariffs on all your goods going to America, where are you? Whose side are you going to be on? You're going to be on your own side, and you're going to say, you know what? It was nice having that cheap Russian oil, but I'm not going to risk everything else I'm doing for that, and let the Russians sell their oil to somebody else. And if that were to happen, the Russian oil would eventually find its way into the market somehow, but it would find its way into the market at like $20 a barrel. And if that were the case, they'd find themselves pretty much out of business in a short order, because the only thing that keeps Russia going right now is the sale of oil. If they don't have the sale of oil, they can't afford the war. And if they can't afford the war, then they're forced to come to the negotiating table.
Well, I want to weigh down on that point, Bill, because yes, this secondary sanctions bill from Lindsey Graham has been, we've been thinking it was going to reach the Senate floor. We thought that Donald Trump had approved it and greenlit it to go to a vote, but it's been put on hold yet again. Now they're on recess, and perhaps in August when they return, it might hit the Senate floor. We don't know. But of course, as you mentioned, it would be a 500% tariff on any country importing Russian oil. It would directly affect China and India the most. But if this does happen, Bill, and this does pass, and this does hit Russia's economy, is there a way at all for Putin to carry out this war at all if this does go ahead?
Well, in the very short term, he can continue to do so because he's got money which he accumulated from the sale of all this oil. But Russia does not have access to borrowing. They can't go and borrow money in the capital markets because sanctions have prevented them from doing that. Russia doesn't have a lot of savings because they've depleted it over a period of time. And so oil has been their lifeline. And so it wouldn't happen right away, but if you were to, if the Lindsey Graham bill were to come into effect, I would give Putin, 6 to 9 months, and then he'd run out of road. And at that point, he would be forced to negotiate. And he'd be forced to negotiate from a position of weakness. And that would be the way to go. And it could be, by the way, that the reason why Trump is doing this is because the Senate and the House are not in session right now. He doesn't want to have Putin get harmed. And so he'll put in place some really watered down version of the Lindsey Graham bill, which everybody can maneuver around. And that might be his way of tipping his hat to Putin and at the same time looking like a tough guy.
Well, Bill, the other option was, and some people speculate the reason why Donald Trump hasn't gone forward with any more secondary sanctions and tariffs is because it might disrupt the global oil economy too much, that prices might go up in the United States. Of course, that happened when the war originally broke out. So Reuters reporting the other day that a different route would be to basically for Trump to basically go directly to India and say, do you mind stop importing Russian oil, basically? And then for Trump to go directly to Saudi and say, can you pump more oil for India? Would that be a good way for Trump to be able to basically implement these secondary sanctions but make sure that there is no global disruption?
Well, I mean, so it's the second part, not the first part, that makes all the difference. So if we were to impose a policy, whatever that policy was, which embargoes Russia's oil. Russia produces 10% of the world's oil. And if you take 10% of the world's oil out of circulation and you have the same amount of oil demand, then in simple economic terms, lower supply, same demand, price goes up. If you were to then find somebody to replace that supply, whether it's Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or anybody for that matter, and you could find a way of dampening the impact, then the price wouldn't go up. But there's a lot of oil to replace. 10% of the world's oil is a lot of oil. And I don't think that Saudi Arabia has the capacity to do that by itself. Perhaps with a few others, you could replace maybe half the oil that Russia is producing. The main reason why the West has not embargoed Russian oil up until now is the justified fear of inflation. We're trying to maximize in governments on different variables. We're trying to stop the war. We're trying to stop inflation. We're trying to balance our budgets, and some of these things run cross current to each other. And so you can't necessarily stop the war without creating inflation, but inflation is crucially important to every government, and so that's why it hasn't happened up until now. But it could be something which happens, which you don't embargo Russian oil, but you just say to the main buyers, you can't buy it anymore. And they've got to then flood the sort of pirate market for oil and for people who don't care about U.S. sanctions. And so the oil is still flowing out there. It's just not flowing at the price that Russia wants it. And that may be the way to go.
And that would be interesting to see if that happens, or at least Donald Trump, I guess, tables it at the very least. But after Donald Trump threatened to, well, not threatened, he announced, I guess, that he was lessening his deadline. We saw former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev responding to Trump slashing the deadline. He wrote on X, "Each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with Trump's own country." So, Bill, that's a threat to say that Russia is willing to go into some sort of war with the United States. But do you think they really think they can go up against the United States?
No, of course not. Russia has not succeeded in going up against Ukraine, which is a much less powerful country than the United States. Much less. I mean, it's absurd for him to say that. But Dmitry Medvedev is a drunken fool who makes all sorts of idiotic statements. And if you were to look at his Twitter feed, you'd see all sorts of bombastic, exaggerated, unrealistic things that he's saying. I think he's trying to stay relevant inside Russian society. He's no longer the prime minister. He was once the president. He's really sort of been sidelined, and so his only role is sort of as a court jester and making these grandiose statements which don't have any basis in reality.
It's also been revealed in the last week, Bill, that a US defense company will provide 33,000 AI guidance kits for Ukrainian drones, paid for by the Pentagon in a $50 million contract. These kits supposedly manually piloted drones to track anonymously and then hit targets of up to a kilometre. So they basically hone in on a target within a kilometre radius to strike. And this coupled with the fact, Bill, that a silent pro-Ukrainian hacking group managed to cause Russia's national airline to cancel dozens of flights this week after a cyber attack caused the company's computer systems to fail. So we've got pro-Ukrainian groups coming out of the woodwork. So on and off the battlefield, it would seem, Bill, that Ukraine has been gathering more support day by day in the last week or so.
Well, it's so on the drones, Ukraine is really revolutionizing the use of drones in warfare. I mean, it used to be that you needed tanks and lots of men to win a war, and Ukraine didn't have a lot of tanks and didn't have a lot of men, but they developed the use of drones, and so they started using drones which were terrorizing Russian soldiers, and then the Russians figured out that they could use various types of jamming equipment so that the drones couldn't be operated. And so then the Ukrainians started running their drones literally off of pieces of wire. Like a 1 kilometer piece of wire, which is not very efficient, because if you're going anywhere near trees or any type of obstacle, your wire gets caught up. Anyone who's ever flown a kite knows that. And so they're trying to then find another way of not being jammed and continuing to use drones to prevent Russia from coming across any more territory. And every day there's a new development and a new technology, and it's both good for Ukraine to have this technology to fight off the Russians, and it's also good for the United States to test out this technology in battlefield conditions to see whether it works for the U.S.'s own military capabilities. And then on the hacking side, again, this is a country that has incredible computer and technology skills, and the fact that they've basically downed the entire Aeroflot system is something which maybe doesn't have huge military significance, but it has huge public significance, because most Russian people don't feel like the war has affected them. They're all going about their business, having a nice summer. So, there's a recent article about more of them traveling to Italy, France, and Spain, getting visas. And the Russian people should know that that this is not, as Putin calls it, a special military operation. This is war. His country is at war, and you kill Ukrainians, and you should expect that there will be costs to Russia. And putting people at an inconvenience traveling is certainly not consistent with people dying in Kiev in their apartments. But every Russian should know that there's a war going on, and this is not a costless war. It's going to affect everybody. And certainly by trapping everybody in their summer travel is one way of making that statement.
Bill, on that note, over the weekend, Vladimir Putin, he cancelled his naval parade. It was meant to take place on Sunday. It's an event to show off Russia's warships. The Kremlin said it was cancelled due to security concerns. And this, of course, comes off the back of Ukraine's recent drone attacks in St. Petersburg and the fact that Ukraine has destroyed 1/3 of Russia's combat fleets. Now, the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation first announced the cancellation online. They said that the Kremlin can no longer pretend that the war doesn't affect Russia's home front. So exactly what you're saying. The war impacts all areas of life in Russia, even symbolic and high-profile events like the Navy parade. Today, Russian warships cannot feel safe, even on their own territory. So I wonder, does the announcement of this cancelled naval parade, Bill, does it show that the Kremlin are basically admitting that they do not feel safe, that these drone attacks have caused disruption?
Well, it's I'm not watching the Russian news on a hour-to-hour basis to know how they're spinning it, but I'm sure they're coming up with a spin that doesn't make it seem like this was some humiliation, because they can spin everything however they want, and there's no counterspin because they control the television, newspapers, radio, etc. But can you imagine what it would be like if they had some grand naval parade and a drone sunk a ship in the middle of that parade? How humiliating that would be for Putin. And so for him, it's better to be mildly humiliated and having to spin it on television to say we canceled the thing than to have a visual catastrophe take place in front of everyone's eyes.
Just finally, Bill, we've obviously seen this change of tune from Trump shifting back to supporting Ukraine and shifting back to supporting NATO and being in NATO's boat. Of course, he's an unpredictable president. We're not quite sure if he would swing back the other way. But just from your perspective, we've seen this 10 to 12 day deadline. We've seen more military equipment sent to Ukraine. But what do you think should be next for Donald Trump to help end this war?
Well, I think that supplying weapons, and as we've seen, the U.S. government supplied weapons paid for by the Europeans, defensive weapons, Patriot missile batteries. That was good. But if we want to end this war, there should be an unlimited supply of offensive weapons to Ukraine, so Ukraine can strike targets deep inside Russia, military targets where they're manufacturing drones or missiles, targets where troops are forming inside of Russian territory, naval bases, Air Force bases, Army bases, so that Russia really has no capacity to carry on this war. At the moment, Ukraine doesn't have that military capability. The United States, in the past, in the Biden administration, didn't provide it because there was such a fear of quote, escalating the war. And Trump hasn't provided it because he's had this ambiguous position towards Ukraine. If we really wanted to end this war, you do it with weapons and you do it with money. Weapons give them more offensive weapons, and money cut off the spigot so they get no more, they can't afford to fight the war. That would be the policy that if Trump really wanted to end this war, he should pursue.
So Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.